Diane. Both of us were born and raised in Routt County. I as a cowgirl and Diane as a farm girl. However, we are going to tell you a lot more stories about women that preceded us and what they did. Now, I hope that each of you saw this poster that was out and about. I will pass it around. Recently, I think it was on Tuesday, Candace and I got an email and said, well, is this woman Marsha or is it Diane?
It's Diane.
But I will pass it around and I'd like you to just take a look at it because it is very typical of this woman that helped settle this area. It was actually Mrs. Wallahan from Craig. But when you look at her, you're going to see the dress. You're going to see the rifle, you're going to see the gun belt with all the bullets in it. You're going to see her boots, which look terribly uncomfortable. She holds a knife in her hand, and she's got a scarf around her neck. All of those, and this silly little bonnet that they had to wear where the men got to wear the big hats. So take a look at that, and that'll give you an insight, and her skirt. Think of doing all this in skirts. So now I'm going to turn it over to Diane, we'll get started.
So if you choose to do the fun little game we're doing, I passed around some cards with, where did that end up? We have some new people. Cards with pens. Probably. Is it back here?
This was for recipes. I'm giving it to you.
We just want you to look at the slides, and every time you see an apron, do a telemark.
Now, don't you wish you could? Oh, what happened? I'm good.
I don't think anybody on that side but you.
Is there anyone here? Okay. Here's
housekeeping. Start. I'll make sure.
Yeah, we're housekeeping here. So, rugged ranch women dawn to dusk. And I think in our lives we even understand the dawn to dusk too, a lot of times. Traveling to Routt County. A lot of the pioneers here were coming to homestead and they had to prove up on a cabin. Some of the ranchers, they'd send the men over or a bunch of men, start the cabin, then the family would fall in the wagons. But there were many families who lived out of tents while they built and started their crops. So I cannot imagine living like that. A lot of them came in these wagons with the narrow wheels. There are multiple families used to come together and they'd meet up. And if anyone's ever done rabbit ears past just in a car, can you imagine? They used to come over Daughenbaugh range and around through Wolcott and that way. Mabel Myers, she was raised up Oak Creek, the South Route way, and she was born in June 1899. And she said, we came out to Oak Creek looking for a ranch. The next year, my whole family came in a covered wagon. It was less than 200 miles from Hudson where we lived, and we were headed to Oak Creek. We packed the dresser, the trunks, and things in the bottom of the wagon first, and Mom and Dad's bed was on top, and us kids slept in the tents. She said, we got to Berthoud Pass, and we couldn't get over the mountain because of snow. It was awful hard winter. We started too early. They didn't have machines then, so the men would shovel the snow off the roads. We stayed at a place on Fraser River called Spruce Lodge for about 2 weeks before we could even get going again. Then we got to Hot Sulphur Springs. We found that the bridge over the Colorado River had washed out. So then Papa went ahead and he was trying to find a place to cross. So it was early spring and the water was pretty deep. Papa thought he remembered where to ford, but he missed it. So when the wheels of the wagon hit the bank, the double trees of the leader broke. And the double trees are right behind the horse that hold the tugs that the horse is pulling. When they break, you're in trouble. And so then the team got caught. The wheel, it got caught. Someone else had to come and pull them out. So they finally got to the Gates Ranch, and we are lucky enough to have Shiloh Gates here. So Papa went with the team up to the house, got a double tree, pulled us out, And they finally arrived here. The water didn't quite come up to the trunks. They were really excited about that because everything they had were in those trunks. But they brought all their possessions in that venerable trunk, especially like yard goods and things that if you get wet, they're destroyed. She said that we got to Oak Creek on the 28th of June. Yeah, and then they started out. So that is not a Round County picture, but that's over Berthoud Pass. Can you imagine? Look at that.
And one thing we should add about this too is that when they left home, the women really did not get to bring a lot of their possessions because they weren't considered necessary. All of their china, any of their china closets, any of their old memories pretty generally stayed back where they were. And then as they continued to cross this kind of thing, and they had more and more trouble with those wagons and the horses getting across, guess which stuff went first? It was the women's stuff because they needed all the farm equipment to be able to start a new life somewhere else. So by the time they got here, they were down to bare bones, not only for the women, but a lot of the male supplies as well.
Anybody know where that is? That's Corona Pass, before they put in the Moffett Tunnel. Elaine Gay, we're very lucky to have her grandson right there. Elaine Gay was born in 1918, and these are her actual words. Well, when you're under 8 years of age, you don't think too much of the country. You're there and you just take it for granted. I remember coming to Colorado and having lots of fears about it. We came over Corona Pass. They didn't have the Moffett Tunnel at that time. I think they were building it. I was very frightened of the mountains. It seemed to me that it was a scary experience looking down out of the train. Can you imagine? I was sick all the way over. I think it was mostly from fear that the train was going to fall off the tracks in places. It was so scary coming from flat country. I had never even ridden a train. There are places where you could see the front of the train as you were back there. Yes, so as an 8-year-old, that was kind of interesting. And of course, the stage. There's a woman in her hat up there. And I don't think we appreciate our mode of transportation now. Stages were dusty, dirty, rutted, muddy, and a lot of the stages had leather springs. That's not like the springs we have now. There's a mode of transportation after you got here. That was the going to town buggy. That was the fancy buggy. Clearing the land and dwellings. You had to break ground to be able to prove up. And it was all done with teams of horses and walking behind. Sometimes I think we forget how ranches here, there were no towns. Ranches were far away, very isolated. Women were isolated. They would walk 4 miles just to go to the neighbor's place. And a lot of times families would visit each other, stay the night, and come back in the morning.
One of the stories that you hear when you read some of their old diaries is how lonely the women got, because once they got here, they were kind of stuck out in those long draws that were a long ways from town, and sometimes it was a long time, maybe 3-4 months before they'd see another white woman, and they would write in their diaries how terribly lonely they got.
We can all relate to that. We have mechanized, we have modern plows, and I think we forget how monumental all these, when you read through a lot of the journals, 3 Wire Winter is a local magazine put out in the 70s where high school kids interviewed pioneers. Time and time again, it's like those winters were long and hard. And you were even more isolated because you had to depend on getting out. Oh, I forgot to tell you this. Tom Ross is our local paper guy. I found this quote of him. He said, "Have you ever noticed that the popular imagery of women, of pioneer women in the West, doesn't do them justice? They're typically portrayed as Annie Oakley in the full skirt, or as a demure woman sitting on the sideboard, seldom with the reins in her hands." Well, we're here to tell you this is a different, this is a different county. And would you like to tell them about when women came here, how they were independent and the reason why?
Sure. you normally have that vision that a family would move here and be part of a homesteading act where you're trying to prove up some ground. And the vision generally is it's the men. But there were a number of women that left the East Coast and the Midwest and came out west in search of ground, and then would homestead up. And what they found was that after they homesteaded up, they were a grand market because these men wanted to marry them. There's a homestead out by our place that one of Larry Munger's grandmothers had homesteaded up first. And then she was able to keep that ground after they got married. And then he added his property to it, and that's how the Munger Ranch started to build. Yes, Molly?
Marsha, both of you have used the word prove up the land.
Good point. The Homestead Act allowed people to come west and to get a piece of ground by proving that they were interested in it. And CJ, help me if I don't get all these facts correct, okay? It was for 160 acres. They had to have it on at least for 5 years and put a structure on it. No fences were required though, is that correct? And there was one other thing that they had to do.
Break ground, do a crop.
Break ground.
And
Live there
be
5 months of the year too.
They had to live there 5
5 months a year, and they had to be a U.S. citizen.
Oh, I
My
didn't know that.
family were from Mother England, and it took them years to get all the paperwork done to denounce Mother England and become a naturalized citizen. They came here in '84, proved up as in squatted, in '86, and he didn't get his citizenship till 1899.
Wow.
But he still got to do his thing, like, it's just on a promise.
Yeah.
Like you go to the government land office and say, I've staked out this 160 acres. And then as 160 acres in Missouri, oh, you can keep lots of cattle, you got great crops. Here, we're semi-arid desert. So you talk about the influx of people coming to Colorado now and wanting their homes. Back in the late 1800s, everybody had their 160 acres. Found out they went bust. So the people that could make it somehow started buying up the neighbor property and increasing their land. Margaret Duncan Brown, she's a sheep herder, was a sheep herder of Elk River. She came here in 1915 with her husband, and 3 years later he dies. She stayed. She started with 25 sheep, ended up with 800 all her life. She had a little one-room cabin, built it up into 8 rooms, and the Denver paper did an article on her, and they said, this unusual woman rides and shoots and pitches hay with the best of men. She can stand toe-to-toe with any man in battle over grazing rights, and she can talk politics and philosophy like a savant. Yet she can still rustle up a savory fried chicken dinner, keep an 8-room house spotless, and somehow finds time to cultivate pansies. That kind of sums it up.
And Todd's grandmother was a maverick in saving ground, in conservation, and if it were not for the Gay family, we would probably have another ski hill out in the Green Valley area. But the Gay family fought hard for that not to happen, and the whole time, Elaine was baking pies. That was how she sweetened the pot with all of the discussions.
I still remember those pies. Here's a typical homestead.
Let's talk about this a little bit.
Go ahead.
When you look at this is actually, these folks live pretty well because they actually had a roof on their house. It was made of boards. But the house was generally one of the last things that was built because you had to protect your animals, you had to protect your equipment. And if you didn't, then you didn't have those resources the next year. So a lot of times the family was just kind of jammed into whatever happened to happen. But this one has a little roof on it. It does have a side room to it. It looks like it is something that might have been utilized for both a barn, storage area, and then I would bet that off to the side where you see one of the wash buckets is where that family lived for a little while until they could get their home built. The chickens, all the wire, this still happens on every ranch in the county, wire hanging on posts.
And the pump is right in the middle. You had to pack water. You wanted your water source as close to the back door as you can get it, and that's very fortunate. That was high living, to have your water so close. And of course, mountains of buckets. Everything you did was with buckets, cans, everything. Hazel Nelson writes inside the cabin. She says, "We lived in a log cabin, and as time progressed, the rooms were added. Because a lot of times you had a one room, and you would just pull down the beds and sleep at night, and you'd pull them up to live." She said, "We had a large cooking stove that kept the room very cozy. The living room was used as a bedroom. Of course, we had an outdoor john. The cook range had a reservoir on the side that always kept the water hot for bathing. So when you used up the water, someone had to go get more water. You were constantly ferrying water into your house. When we'd use a lot of hot water, someone would fill it up again. That meant several pails of water coming from the pump. Our Sunday bath was a wash tub in the middle of the floor." Oh, shoot, where is it? I have a wash tub somewhere. Oh, well,
I think you skipped over a sauce, but there we go.
there's a wash tub. There's actually a picture inside, but that's okay, we'll come to it. So here's another view of that same cabin. Notice the chicken wire, the saw. Of course, there's your wash tub. That's what used to have your a lot of times you took your bath on Saturday night because you go to Sunday meetings. So,
Or church.
or church. That's what I meant, Sunday meetings.
And look at this little girl at the bottom.
So this guy is an original ancestor that came over from England and homesteaded, and that's his grandbaby. That's what women had to wear. Long skirts, petticoats, their little tiny shoes, and all. Catherine Harwig, that used to have Harwigs over here, she said, "I don't remember a time my feet were warm in the winter." And she even lived in town. And you see all the stuff? It's ready and waiting. Broom, shovel, sack. I'm sure this is like a coal bin. A lot of the ranchers mined coal right out in the side of the hill, or they bought it from other places where it's mined. How clean do you think kids were back then? What do you think? And they had cloth. Can you guys help me with this? There was a special cloth that it was kind of real, like
Burlap?
it wasn't burlap. It had kind of a plasticky coating on it. Do you remember that?
Oilcloth.
Oilcloth. Thank you. Pretty sure this is oilcloth. They did a lot of canning outside because it was so hot. You had to have so much fire going. Pretty sure that's a canning corner or fixing things in the summer, or even laundry.
So you call those pinafores aprons?
Yes, I would call those aprons, wouldn't you? Because they're over. Pinafores. Is a pinafore? What do you think? I'll let you decide.
Marsha, I have a question. For many of the farms in Europe, I think, they set them up so that the cattle or the livestock were on the floor level, the ground level, and the house was built above. But I never have seen that adapted until maybe
Recently.
yeah, fairly recently. Was it because it was too difficult to get up for another floor, or because the ground was too hard, they couldn't? I'm just,
I think mainly because we had a lot of ground here. They didn't have to build their houses above their buildings. But you were absolutely right. That was one of the problems when they came here, is that ground was hard.
yeah.
It had a lot of rock in it because the rivers have gone through here, and we do live on the Rocky Mountains. And so it was really a trial to try to put anything into the ground. When you dug a well, it was a project. Diane will have a couple excerpts talking about how long it took their families to drill wells, or dig wells. But most of your homes, you were able just to put on a rock foundation and move on. Same with the barns and the outbuildings.
Do you know who those children are? Do we know what?
The one without the pinafore, tallest in back, she would be Dorothy Jean Hitchens, later a Moore. Melvin Hitchens is beside her. He's like, that's Melvin Hitchens. Oh, everybody knows him. That's Melvin right there. And then two cousins. And I don't know their names right now. Eileen, I think it's Eileen and Audrey Hitchens, which would be another Hitchens brother that was out there in Elk River. So they're cousins.
Now, did they have anything like a doctor there or a nurse that helped with birth or anything?
We're gonna get to that, hold that thought. That's a great question. And welcome. I met him at the ski hill. He's from originally from Germany. So we invited him over.
Can I add something to the German farms that this lady mentioned?
Please.
These type farms were primarily in the Black Forest, and as you correct it, and they built them into the mountain. So they were naturally warm. The animals in there, and the people above slept above it, And they had these straw roofs, of course, the thatched roofs as we call them here.
Good. Plus, having relatives in Wisconsin, a lot of their barns are set up that way because they have to keep, when it's 20 below in Wisconsin, it's not like 20 below here. They have to keep the dairy cattle inside for their udders and stuff. And we have a drier climate here. And people are amazed. They go, you don't have your horses in barns? The cows are out in the field? People have a hard time with that. They think we're being neglectful. Right. She asked what date this is. The tallest one was born in 1921. So do the math. I'm 35. Probably, yeah, I'd say 29, 30. Root cellar. Always the buckets. This is a picture of a root cellar. It was built back into the hill. We have lots of sandstone rock. It's a very plentiful building source. It doesn't last that long, so you don't see as many old buildings here because all the foundations were built on sandstone. It has, up on top, it has two beams going across, and then they would take flat board and put it this way, and that actually has a soddy type roof. It has dirt roof on it.
One of the disadvantages to your root cellars, just like this one is more above ground, but some of them were actually underground, was you would be so careful getting your food down in there, and the next time you went down, so were the rattlesnakes. Because it was protected for them. So the women and the kids learned very early when they went into the area into these to get food out, to make a lot of noise to wake up the rattlers before they got connected.
And I don't have it with me, but there's an old article where two young children, the pioneers had built their house into, like this, into the hill, and the kids had a little bunk, and they found them dead the next morning because of a rattler. That was kind of sad. That was sad times back then. There was also some great times. Food storage. Hazel Nelson again. The reason she's quoted so much is when Marsha said, let's do it on Ranch Women, going through all the slides. Guess who took all the pictures? The women. Guess who all the interviews were back then in the 70s? The men. So we have very few women histories out of this three-wire winter. But she says the butchering of most of the meat was a neighbor deal. Everybody came and helped each other. We cured our own bacon and ham in our own smokehouse. They lived south route. We bought some kind of liquid smoke, and when butchering the pigs, we would sometimes do 2 or 3 a day. One of those we might have sold in town to buy other things that you didn't have. A lot of bartering. I will bring in my eggs, cream. Would you give me some material goods? Would you give me some flour? You know, a lot of bartering. We had these big 50-pound cans of lard, like garbage cans. They would slice and cut the meat, put them in plates, and stack them in these big lard cans. The lard wasn't in it. And then we'd bury it in the ground because the coolness of the ground and the moisture would keep it cool. Then in the winter, there was trouble sometimes. That's why we would put it in by plates so you could click it off because it was frozen, and if you only wanted the top batch, you could break it loose. So they made up TV dinners back then. Seriously. If any meat was needed in the summer, and what fresh we couldn't use, Mom would can. Every kid in this county was raised on canned trout, canned meat, venison.
A few of them died by canned meat.
Oh, yes. Botulism was rampant. Yes. She canned her beef and pork. Eggs were put down in the grain bin in buckets with layers of grain in between them. We oiled them to keep them sealed. We had that question last year. You have to oil the eggs to keep them fresh. So I found that was pretty cool.
How long did they keep like that?
Months.
Months?
Wow.
When they were exposed to the
Let's just say they ate a lot of bad food. Really? Yeah?
They did the water glass for eggs as well, where they actually stored them in a special container of some kind of substance. The recipe is in the Fair Cookbook, and you could buy water glass, Linda Long told us, at the merchant store in Oak Creek, and you'd be able to store your eggs, through the winter and actually be able to use them when your chickens weren't laying.
Nice.
Pretty amazing.
This is an iconic photograph because it shows the isolation. It shows that even though they're in the middle of nowhere, you still had your little dresses for your girls. They dressed boys like this too, for probably to the time they were 4. Look at the cabin back there. Were we put together by a committee? No. But they were very fortunate because they have tin now, so this is a later photo. A lot of times they would use oilcloth. There's an excerpt of a lady saying, "Oh, I hated springtime because Dad would shovel all the dirt off. We'd take down those oilcloths, we'd wash them, dry them, hang them back up, and put more dirt on them the next year."
The sod, yeah.
Sod, right?
Then they also whitewashed the inside of their cabins.
Yes.
And Mother said then every spring they had to do it over again. And how they ventilated, when it would rain, leak, how they get the water out by little ditches that went under the logs.
Exactly.
Oh, go back to that one picture a second.
Sure.
Here on the side, I think this might be a stand of hollyhocks. And that's usually one good way to tell where some of the old homestead homes were, because hollyhocks were something that they planted mostly around the outhouses because they were pretty and they grew tall. And so you were hiding the outhouse from the rest of the scenery. Now this one, it's either hollyhocks or ivy. I can't tell for sure, but I think it might be a stand of hollyhocks.
I just get cold looking at that picture. This is the hog pen, and on the back of the photo it says, "Oh, look we just put a top on our little barn up there." They grew things up there so that the deer wouldn't get it. They were so excited about that. There's that pump, and they're adding on slowly, and there's the chicken wire, and this is she called it hoarfrost.
This gadget that's right here probably used to feed either chickens or pigs. Just a little low trough.
Yep. Getting water here is right by Milner. The whole neighborhood showed up to make a spring box actually poured out of cement. And I thought this was pretty cool because the women, you really can't see it, but the women are carrying all the pails of water. And the men are running the machine and pouring it.
And you notice what they're in.
Yes.
Their skirts.
Everyday life. Come on in. Here's another chair.
There's room back here. There's one chair back here.
Oh, okay. Here you go. 2 chairs.
There is another chair here.
Oh, there it is. This is not from Route County. I got this off of the USDA site. But there's no photos of inside the house because we didn't have photography like the lights and stuff. So there you are.
Look at the stove. This is generally what they would have, one stove in the entire house to heat the entire thing, let alone to cook on. And I believe that this is a wood stove. You may have been able to put coal into it. But that is literally, look at the stack that comes up, the pipe. It's amazing to me they didn't burn down more houses because it just literally went through the roof. But just the work that it took to keep that stove hot. And you kept it hot winter and summer because in the winter you needed it for the heat, but in the summer you also needed it to cook with. So those things ran 365 days a year pretty generally.
Yes, I was just gonna get to that. Thank you. Anybody know what's going on over on the right here, that whole setup? Baking center. Underneath, see the round right there? That's your flour bin. Pulls out and down. And you had bread day, you had baking day. And Nita Harold, when she did that talk over last Monday night, said, our family always did baking day on Washington because we heated up all that wood, heated it up for wash. It got everything hot, you might as well make bread at the same time. Did you notice what's on the back walls? Catherine Harwig's used to be, it still is. When she first came here, they had a little place behind. She said it was up on stilts. She said it had a potbelly stove, this is what Marsha said, right here in the center. That was the heat for the whole store. The building was up on stilts. Times were tough back then. It was just up on stilts and open underneath, so we banked snow up to try to keep the drafts out. It was deep enough to help the breeze from blowing under the floorboards. Outside, it was called board and bat. That's where you have boards and you put a little piece of board down the crack to try to lessen that airflow. We used pink building paper to keep the breeze out to make it a little warmer. And then we put gunny sacks on the floor to walk on. The first winter we were here, we nearly froze to death. It warmed up in the afternoons and it was so nice. That afternoon sun coming in. Dressing. How many of you have worn that old wool? And when it gets wet, what does it do?
Smells.
Smells. It gets cold. It gets hard when it refreezes. And you get all these little balls all over it, and it takes forever to dry by the coal stove. We have such amazing materials now.
But look how tough that little guy is. They still don't wear mittens.
Oh, yeah. Typically. Oh, sorry.
That's okay, we're ready.
Okay, here we go. So here's them pouring the spring box again. Marsha says, you have to include that. Look at those kids' clothes.
Oh, yeah.
Wash day, once a week.
Wow.
You made your clothes do. I'll bet they could stand up their clothes in
I bet you kept him outside more.
Oh, yeah.
Look at the little guy, he's just expected to work right along. He's
That's
doing
Melvin
it.
Hitchens too. Right. School, Fair Play Schoolhouse, mode of transportation, horse. A teacher back then could not be married. She had a little teacherage. We lost more teachers either to marrying the rancher to get out of this situation, or they just had to leave because they could not stand the isolation. Because a teacher was expected to, we think of a teacher just ranging the desks, say good morning children, teach them, send them home. She was responsible for stoking the fire, getting the water in. If she was a smart teacher, I think she would have made some of her students do it too. But she was absolutely responsible for daily sweeping, keeping the teachery and the schoolhouse in very good shape, single-handedly by yourself. Do you want to add anything, Marsha? Lambs, aren't they cute? We love our animals, and we eat them also. It's a dance, right?
It's a cycle of life.
It's a cycle of life.
And we need to do a call out here to Shiloh because she has been lambing like crazy. And it doesn't get any easier, does it?
No.
You can relate to this.
It's still cold.
You know this position, don't you?
Yeah.
Very well.
But I have a 3-year-old that does that for me.
They talked about dairy cows Monday. I wish a lot of you guys should have gone to that talk. It was awesome. Cattle were a mainstay, especially for selling products in town to get other supplies.
The thing about this is that we are trying to return to sustainability, and we think we're so smart right now because we should grow our own food, we should grow our own animals, and we should be all self-contained. These people had us beat long before we even thought of this again. But it was a matter of necessity. You couldn't go to the grocery store every 2 hours. You had to have everything that you needed for a long period of time. And so you had the milk cows not only for the milk, but for the food. You had a few sheep, not only for the food, but also because you could get a cash crop off of that with your wool. You had some beef cattle, again, so that you could eat them, but you could also maybe sell them. You had the chickens, and you hauled the eggs to town and you sold those. You're also able to sell your cream and your milk in town, and then later on in Denver. And you raised a little bit of grain for your animals to eat, but if you were lucky, you were able to bring those oats to town and sell them to people that had horses here. So you had to be sustainable or you literally starved to death.
And we need to bring up the Depression. Around here, when everybody went broke, farmers and ranchers probably didn't feel it as much because they were very self-sufficient. Elaine Gay, your grandmother, comments on the 4-H during the Depression, right when it hit. She said, we got $65 per head for our calves in 4-H. That was a fabulous price in those days. I think they were bringing about $10 to $15 a head. Well, we went to town and we bought coats and really nice clothes. And at that time, you could get a pair of shoes for $1 and a coat probably cost $10. So I'm sure they blew the whole wad, right? We really got a wardrobe. And we gave the check to the Golden Rule store. Monday morning, the bank's closed due to the Depression. We had to put in a big strawberry patch to make up for that check. The check bounced. They're still responsible. We picked and sold strawberries all summer. My dad really felt bad about it. We didn't have any money after the banks went broke. So, timing was awful. And Hazy Werner, Bud Werner's mother, they were a ranching family. She said she was born on a ranch homestead up by Yellow Jacket Pass in 1911. Oh, I have a picture of her. I guess I better wait. Let's wait on that one. It was talking about chores, but I have a picture of her, so it's kind of cool to see the picture. Here's a typical farmyard. How do you think your clothes smelled after a week of that? Yeah.
Not only did you have all the work to feed out this hay, but you see how that hay is mounted back up over there? That was not an easy process to get that there. You had to be out in the fields cutting those hay, and most of the women worked right alongside the men because they were partners. It was just part of that operation to be involved with agriculture and whatever you were doing. So you cut all that hay, and one way or another you got it in closer because you didn't have the equipment to go out and feed out in those meadows and those fields. And then they were loose stacked here. So when you look up here, this is actually hay that's mounded up. And it's hard getting it in there, but it's a bear cat getting it out as well, because by then it has frozen and it is really tough trying to pull all that hay out of there. The work never ended for trying to feed your animals. But you know what? Those animals were fed long before your kids and your husbands were. The first thing when you got up in the morning, generally you went out and at least you took care of some peripheral animal care. And then you might come back into a hot breakfast that guess who had cooked. And they were always stout, hearty breakfasts. And then you'd eat, and then you would go back out and do the bigger portion of your chores.
So I just have to say this now about Hazy, because that's exactly what she said. She said there were 10 in the family. I'm the oldest. There were 2 older I'm the oldest girl. There were 2 older boys. Chores? Yes, we had chores. We had 5 girls, 5 boys, but some of them died at a very young age of sugar diabetes. There was always lots of work for me to do. We had to milk the cows 20 to 25 every morning and every night, and help feed the cattle, feed the pigs, and the chickens. In the winter times, we peddled meat. So everything got fed before you did. Growing child, growling stomach. Yeah, I'm sure they appreciated their breakfast. Cream separator. A lot of the women, a lot of the families here. Oh, everyone's going, I remember those.
Clean those things. Oh.
Jackie explained why they were so hard to clean.
Well, they had all these, inside they had a number of discs, I want to say 40 or 50 some discs, and you had to clean each of those individually, or your milk would smell bad. And some neighbors had good milk and other neighbors didn't. But it was always our job to clean the separator. I later made a flower pot out of it.
Smart woman.
What happened at our house, Jackie? We finally got a dishwasher, and I learned how to spread all those out in the
Oh.
dishwasher.
You were uptown, Joe.
People who didn't have cream separators, the women were the cream separators. You'd wait for the cream to rise to the top and you'd ladle it out. You'd make butter, sell cream in town, cottage cheese. Cheese. There they are feeding the chickens. This is probably in the 30s. There's the old Maxwell, 1927 Maxwell car. That's when they started coming in there. Mrs. Murphy, your apron was a very valuable thing as a ranch woman. There's a famous poem that you've probably heard about how it washes away children's tears, wipes runny noses, gathers eggs, gathers kindling, does all these awesome things. Women, all these old photos you can see how, and it helped keep you clean for the next day because you wore your clothes all the time. There we go. That's pretty iconic. You're gardening while your laundry's drying.
It's like Ashley, look at her short skirt.
And that is a later photo. I think this is late 40s, maybe early
But
50s.
the wash was probably still done, I would guess, in one of the cylinder washing machines, and you put water in it once, and you washed every bit of clothes in different cycles within that one wash unit. And then you had another tub over here that you would rinse, and then you had a wringer that would go through it to help get rid of all that water, and then you would take it out to the line and hang it up. And I can remember that in the wintertime, when you brought those clothes back in, they would be just as stiff as they could be. Literally, if you hit them on the door when you were walking through with your sheets, you could crack the fabrics. But then once you got them inside and they warmed up, they were just as clean and dry as they could be, because the moisture really did evaporate out of it. But it was tough. I can remember my mother hanging clothes and bending down to the line because the snow was so deep.
I
can remember
bringing them
running through the line
inside
of
so they would
clothes.
dry, and you'd have clothes all over the house for a week at a time.
They smell good.
They smelled
Yeah.
great. Mark?
Oh,
Oh, you're waving at somebody? Okay.
I remember running through the clothes and getting yelled at. I just watched those. I didn't get it until I became a mother. Take your boots off right there. What do you think this is? You know? And I go, oh God, that's my mother.
Yeah.
How about clotheslining your brother
Oh,
on the horse?
closelining your brother.
Like jumping the clothesline on the horse, just to see if you could.
So this is not a Route County photo, but it could be in Route County. Soap making, right? There's one lady, Margaret Rossi. I'm sure a lot of you know the Rossi families. Margaret Rossi said, well, soap making is quite a lengthy process. I can remember when people used to use lye from wood. You could buy it cans in the store, but you could also use the lye from wood ashes. The lye was added to the fat and the water in a big cauldron. Many people made soap in their backyard because the fire had to be really hot and it was often very smoky. Most women used round bottom kettles that hung over a campfire. A long paddle was used to stir it. You had to do it for like 2 hours. So they must have taken turn. I don't think I could stir for 2 hours. You wouldn't want to get any of that lye on you. It would burn and eat your skin. There's some sort of secret in getting the lye and the lard to mix together well, because it must be stirred and stirred and stirred, and it all has to render, that fat has to render before it congeals. And it mingles with the water. It took a couple of hours just to make a batch of soap. Okay. There's what Marsha was talking about. There's the wringer, she's washing wringer, and you had several buckets to rinse in. You only needed one wash bucket. This is the sad iron. This one isn't a sad iron, but it's like that. There's Marsha's.
And we're gonna pass this around. Now, this was a fairly light one, and, but you'll see how hard it was to use. Don't drop it on your toes, okay?
No, it's heavy. Can you wax your skis with that?
Why would you want to?
I have one.
Oh, here's another interesting thing on laundry, when we were talking about hanging clothes on the line. Margaret Rossi also said, I was the laundry lady. I had 6 brothers and sisters. Those were horrendous times. We washed the bedding and the quilts in the spring after being shut in all winter. Right? We would usually soak them in a big tub and melt the soap on the stove. Sometimes we'd get the younger kids to climb in and stomp them down. Right? Stomp them. Actually, there's a better method than trying to lift them so filled with water. We would wait for a nice spring day and we would drag them out onto the lawn. Because if you put them up on the, it was really hard to drag them up onto the line, and plus they would go all askew because they were all hand stitched. So we'd lay them out on the lawn to dry. Thought that was pretty cool. It would take all day to do ordinary laundry for one family, and that is if you had 1 tub washing, 1 tub soaking, and 1 to 2 tubs to rinse in. We were pretty tired after washing, and our back just about had all it could stand. The week before I was married, my parents bought a washing machine. I guess they thought they were losing their laundress. Yep. All right. So now the iron, a lady, Mary Florence Potts, was this pioneering engineer. Because when you had irons, they had to be super hot because you couldn't get the wrinkles out. So you'd have 2 or 3 irons lined up on the stove. You'd iron, you'd put that one over here, and then you'd take the next hot one. And you always had to have 4 or 5 irons. She invented the detachable wood handle, where you just click it in, do your thing, put it back, and click it on. It was an amazing invention, and the reason it was so popular, because she got a patent on it, and it was in Sears and Roebuck, and it was like your first mass-produced, one of the first mass-produced ironing inventions that made women's life much easier. And there's that baking center again.
A kitchen piano. Can you believe that? That makes us so much happier, doesn't it?
Everything at her finger's ends. You really need this. Nothing to walk or long for. Sugar, flour, spice, milk, eggs, molasses in a self-cleaning cabinet. There was a really good marketer behind this. Yes.
But can you imagine really how convenient that was?
Yes,
to
it was.
have everything in one spot.
And there is the cook stove. This is one of the few pictures I have inside a house.
With the aluminum pan up on top of the stove.
Yes.
I was supposed
Is anyone drinking out of a coffee pot like that? Coffee? Right. Marsha said, you just have to put this in. Those are sage chickens, grouse. What was I going to say about this? When the pioneers first came here, one pioneer said you could take a rock and throw it and hit a sage hen. Well, by the time the miners were done and the early pioneers, the government intervened and decided we needed a game warden. His name was Mr. Campbell. So I have a small quip from my family. My grandmother, and it was unheard of when people came to your house not to feed them between meals and especially at a meal. So Mr. Campbell, the game warden's at their house. She's preparing dinner, she's getting all ready, and she says, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Game Warden, what would you do if some sage chickens actually accidentally got in the binder and we cut their legs off? He goes, well, I'd eat them. She said, sit down to dinner. And he politely picked buckshot out of his teeth and never said a word. There's a rugged woman bringing in dinner. Look what they had to wear back then. Life and death. All right, Marsha, you want to just expound on that? She knows all these women in this. This is her end of the county.
The April, and this is up Elk River a little bit, and this talks about an April shower where they were getting together to hold a baby shower for 4 women that were expecting babies almost at the same time. So it was Catherine Belton and Esther Keller and Dorothy Jean Moore and who was the 4th one? Helen Hughes, yes. But some of the guests that were going to be there were Frances Dorr and me, which was one of your aunts, right? And then Teresa Cross and Vera Gert. So that was a big thing. Even then, and it was so important to have those baby showers because literally you had nothing. And so for people to get together and give you something, it was just a treasured thing in your life. Same were true for weddings. When most folks got married, nobody had anything to give them. And so what they would do instead of have a wedding was usually have a chivaree. And this happened after the actual event of their wedding. Usually happened in evening and caught the couple by surprise. And everybody would go to their house and beat pans and carry on. They take the bride one direction, they take the groom another direction, they play terrible tricks on him. They bring him back, and by that time, they had brought something with them to put on their tables. But something not being like a big TV set, or it would be maybe a dish. Betty Cameron told me that when she and Louis got married, they had 2 plates, and they had 2 forks, and they shared a spoon. And that's how they got started.
Mary Pat just picked up one of my relatives, Jeannie Kitchens is on there somewhere.
Oh, good.
And also Anna Mae was your host.
Yes, come to the Fred May Ranch.
Oh, you're right.
About 4.5 miles on Highway 129, April 1st, 1943, 2 p.m.
For the April shower.
Born there.
You might have been there, yeah.
And this is in a poem. It's just beautiful. All right. That's Hazel Porter. As a young girl. And her mother came here homesteading. And let's see. She said, I thought this was interesting that she actually has some prices. She said, we butcher a beef, cut it up, and peddle in the mining towns. We try to go every week. We separated the milk, and Mama would churn the butter and make cottage cheese. We took all this stuff that we had, butter, beef, eggs, hogs, and all, to sell. We probably charged 25 to 35 cents a pound for the butter. We took buttermilk and cottage cheese in big stone crocks, and it was so much a ladle. The women would bring their bowls. Ladies would bring their bowls down to the wagon. We would dip it out and sell it to them.
This was the Ralston family. It was the Ralston family.
Got it. Yeah, I didn't know her maiden name. There you go. The 1918 flu epidemic. This is a newer, what do you call it? Graveyard. It's the only picture I had. The flu epidemic swept through in 1918, 1919. Whole families, neighbors, a lot of people died, and it was very precious to how people took care of each other. Joe Blanford was self-appointed to dig graves. He said, I did it all my life just for the community. And he says, let me find it here. Elk Mountain Cemetery, it's out where Marsha lives on Elk River on a hill. It looks right at Elk Mountain's sleeping giant. He said, I helped dig graves since 1915. There were 3 or 4 graves there of some children who died of smallpox. It happened to the Troll children. There were 3 or 4 of them. One of them died first. They went up to bury him, and when they came back, the other 2 were dead. When someone would die in the neighborhood, the rest of us would set a day. And back then, days were precious. They would set a whole day to go down and dig the hole. The neighbors turned out, and you don't see that much of these days, but we lived for each other. I have a lot of relatives up there that also died of miners' consumption. And they talk about the 1918 flu epidemic where everyone was just dropping like flies. They couldn't even keep up with some of the graves. So children were very important. You had a baby, like I have a 1918 journal of my grandmother journaling and just everyday things, and she goes, "Oh, Marie, we had this little baby shower for her. She was so pleased. She got nice little things." A week later, she has a baby. 2 or 3 days later, "Marie doesn't look so well. I'm worried about her." A few more days goes by. They called the town doctor. They have doctors there. We're all ordered to stay away. She made it through the night. And then a few entries later, we had the nicest funeral for Marie. She had very pretty flowers. And I think that was very protective because you had to kind of distance yourself, and it was very factual in her diary. But babies were very precious back then, and birthdays were a big thing, and if your kid lived past those infants' years, they didn't have antibiotics. You could die of a cold.
And I think that's one reason that women journaled as much as they did, because there wasn't a lot of sympathy. The men were very, very busy and maybe didn't have it in their hearts or in their minds to be real sympathetic about this terrible grief that you'd gone through. And so they would put that more into their journals. And that's one of the reasons that you hear about the incredible loneliness, is because they've also lost kids and they didn't have anyone to grieve with.
And yeah, many kids died in childbirth, and many women died in childbirth. Oh, let's talk about fun moments now.
Is this where we want to get this started from that? Sure. Okay. This is a little bit later, but it's so precious. Jay Fetcher said it to me the other day, and it was a letter that was written by his aunt when she had their third child, actually. She was actually here in the hospital, and it was written June 15th, 1950, to her parents. "No, the baby was not born in the barn. We made it to Steamboat on Monday. But to let you know, on Monday we cleaned the house in the morning, Alice upstairs, I downstairs. We washed and waxed the kitchen floor, got lunch for my gang," and later in the letter she makes reference to the fact that this gang was 9 hired men and her husband, because they were branding and getting ready to move cattle upriver. Made out an order for diapers and things from Ward's, ordered canvas for our deck chairs from Sears, made a shopping list, for I planned to go to town, mostly to get meat from the locker, which is over where Steamboat Meat and Seafood is now. Later on, she said, "At last, about 3 p.m., I got off of the ranch, headed to town. As soon as I was in the car, I knew that I had contractions. So I went to the doctor's office first and made an appointment for an hour later. I did some shopping and had quite a few things, so I went to the doc earlier. And he said since I was an intelligent person and that the head was very low, he'd let me go home, feed my people. And that was about 5 p.m. when she left town. But I know when she left the doctor's office. I still had to buy diapers to take to the hospital and the ice cream that I promised the boys. So I got back to the ranch about 6. The men were busy branding, but Stan just then came into the house for cigarettes. I nabbed him and we were off within 10 minutes. By 9 p.m., we had a new baby boy. And then she goes on talking about poor Stan because he was having to do all the work at home. And another sentence that I think is precious. I am enjoying this rest so. The luxury of reading and napping, of meals in bed, and I enjoy the peace and quiet, and I enjoy being alone so much. Saturday, I will go home, I think. I am looking forward to it. Pardon? It was Gertrude. One other thing I want to ask, well, how heavy do you think this iron was?
Yeah, that's right. That was
How heavy? It was 8 pounds because, you're right, Marsha, it's got the 8 on the front of the iron, and that shows how heavy it is. And did you know how it was kind of ergonomically designed so that your wrist could turn a little bit? But you understand now why most ranch women don't have to go to the gym. Even today, the amount of exercise that we get at our home doing just these typical chores far outbeats what you get at the gym.
Are you inviting the city people out?
Anybody. We're fixing fence right now, and we're starting to have calves, so there's a lot of work going on. So anytime you want to come out, we'll supply the fencing pliers.
And always sweeping the mud out.
And the mud, yeah.
The mud. So you want to know what's going on here? Yes, I heard it. Swimming suits. You had to be modest back then. Those are swimming suits. There's later. Look how much we changed in just about a decade. And one of the fun things to do here was the river. Have you swam? I've swam in the river all my life. This just goes to show you that laundry thing again. They have rolled up their pants. Did it work? No. This is up Elk Creek Schoolhouse, the Nothing Daunted book that was so famous. Elkhead. Did I say Elk Creek? Elk Creek Schoolhouse at Elkhead. This is an immigrant he was born here in Canada, but he's of Switzerland descent. He was 14 years old and came to work on the Kerry Ranch. So poor, his family decided this wasn't a place for him and he stayed. Then this lady, she was my great-grandmother. She came from Oregon, and she loved it here, and she stayed on and worked at cooking in one of the restaurants. She was 16 years old when she married him, and he was in his mid-20s. And my grandmother and aunt are on this was called Baby Burro. They were so poor, but one thing they had was their baby burro. That is the highlight of their childhood. Mrs. Bodfish is the school teacher there. This family couldn't make it up there. They were boarding teachers. They tried to make it. He was a carpenter. He went down to Mount Harris. He carpentered there for a while. They ended up having Shorty's Cafe in Hayden. And the one thing that my grandmother right here remembers was, my mom was always working. I was a lost child. She just, all her life said, my mother never had time for me because she worked so hard. But you can tell they had fun too. I thought that was interesting, the stock bridge. They put that in because the main street, there were thousands and thousands of cattle that came through Steamboat. That stock bridge was amazing. That's about 1910. So when you went to town, you went to town and got your supplies. That's kind of what it looked like. The Grange Hall. What people did for fun, they got together. What? Oh, counting aprons. Well, Marsha, you want to comment on the Grange Hall? You actually remember it.
I do remember the Grange Hall. It was about a quarter of a mile from where we live on the Lower Elk River. And it was in my mind, it was a huge, huge building. But I'll tell you a story about my grandmother. When they moved here to this area in 1939, they had starved out of Nebraska. Started out across Nebraska, and then came across into Colorado. She had not been here, but my step-grandfather had been to hunt and knew that there was a lifestyle here. So they came into this community. And she said when they drove over Rabbit Ears Pass, she thought she died and gone to heaven because it was absolutely so beautiful as compared to the dirt fields of Nebraska. Settled out on the mesa there above the Elk River, the lower Elk River, and the Grange Hall was the community building where they all got together for dances, for community meetings, for showers, for whatever. And Christmas Eve, she said they left to go to a Christmas party. And you have to understand, two parties were parties back then. When you went, you'd go early in the evening, the women all packed lunches, suppers, all that kind of thing. Somebody always brought their instruments and played, and people danced. They
So I'll bet it was their anniversary, and the whole community turned out. Everyone loved Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. They even took in kids to raise.
Marsha, you have electricity there. What year do you think that was?
all right, I can tell you that
1946
I would
was when
guess,
they started putting electricity in the community. Steamboat had electricity because they had their own generator and stuff. And it came out of,
yeah, this lady died in 1950. So it had to be before that, you're right.
Where was this building located?
It's on County Road 44, and it's about 2 3/4 miles up from US 40. All that is there now are some of the sandstone foundation blocks. It came down probably in the early 1960s, just simply because it was no longer safe. Everything about it was on cement, on sandstone blocks, and it was either going to be an investment to put it back together or to tear it down, and they chose to tear it down. I think it was a mistake for the community. Jackie?
The Perry Clark Ranch was the first ranch in the valley to have electricity. And we moved there in 1946, and there was electricity on the ranch at that time. But that was the first ranch to have electricity. So probably about
That time then, wasn't it? Because that would have been right down the same line.
well, I know because Mother got out and beat the bushes for Rural Electric Association. And there was a membership fee of $5. And she told her cousin, Matt Gates, actually, he was an uncle on the stage party, if he didn't put electricity in, he'd probably burn his barn down because they used, and he said, no, I have a, what is it?
The kerosene boilers.
No, actually makes electricity.
Generator.
Generator. But it was in the house. So instead of burning the house down, or the barn down, he burned down the house.
What time is it? Oh, does anyone need to leave? We're past 1 o'clock. Skunk cabbage. That's my grandma. They sewed together some skunk cabbage.
She looks like Peter Pan.
Is that an apron?
I bet if you took it off, it was not an apron.
And it's so fun. I always wondered why my mom was real tiny. This is my grandma. That's me. Look at the little tiny hands. I go, that's my body type. Yeah, short and square. I'm assuming with this type of dress, this was probably a Sunday thing. She's back picking something back there. They grab the babies and grab the old ladies. And let's all go. There's a blanket there for the little baby and they're out. And it amazes me how as much time as they spent outside, what they do for recreation. They went on horseback rides, they went camping. Faith. You get to talk about that one, Marsha.
Faith really played an important part in many of these. First of all, a lot of them were immigrants because they had come from areas that were based on the Lutheran Church, the Catholic Church, the Methodist Church. And so when they came here, they still continued with that. Plus, when you live on the land like these people did, you just naturally had a very strong faith that you knew there was a higher being that was going to take care of you, that was going to provide for you. However, the men were the ones that always were running the churches. They were the ones that could be the pastors. They were the ones that sat on all the committees. They were the ones that made the decisions. But the women would get together and do the work that the men decided needed to be done. And this is probably one of the groups from a church that has the Women's Aid Society that had gotten together and were lucky enough to have their pictures taken.
Yeah, the preacher is right there. I don't know his name.
Sir.
Cowgirls. The belle of the ranch. This is the romantic cowgirl. She's so clean. She's so well put together. She has beautiful tack.
And a great gun.
Nice gun. And she just looks like she enjoys every minute of her life. That's what ranch women in Round County look like.
Yeah. Now look at that horse. He's got quite a nose on him, doesn't he?
Those are bloomers. And there's an excerpt in the 30s where this lady in her journal says, our coveralls are coming in from Sears and Roebuck today. We are so excited. So they don all their overalls and go tobogganing, and they called her the teddy bear in it. The overalls changed a woman's life here.
The great thing about women is that no matter what they were asked to do, they could. And not only did they do everything in the house, but a lot of them were also the farm crew, but they also became the cowboy crews as well. And most of us would get greatly insulted if we were expected to stay home on the days that you gathered, on the days the calves were being born, on the days that you branded, on the days that you moved cattle in and out. And these women, first of all, would fix whatever meals needed to be fixed for the entire day. And then they'd go out and they'd climb on horseback. Again, look at the size of that saddle horn. If you missed a gate on that, you'd know it, wouldn't you? She's in her skirt and a pair of boots. And think how uncomfortable that would be, those of you that ride any, to have to do it in a skirt.
And those boots were lace up.
They probably were, Joe. Yeah, they probably were lace up.
And as a side note, behind her is a road grader. There were lots of volunteers here trying to keep those roads in good shape to pass because cars were just coming into existence. Roger Butler has a comment about his mother. He says, my mother was quite a rugged individual. We had about 23 head of cattle and 3 horses. She drove them from our farm, way out over there, to Steamboat to get rid of them. We kept 1 horse and sold the livestock for money to live on. She spent days driving the cattle from McCoy to here, which is about 60 miles, all by herself. Wow. 23 head. They were cattle women, for sure.
Monday evening, Paul Bonnefeld brought some artifacts. It was really put a pop-up museum there at the Agriculture Heritage discussion. But one of them is had a set of spurs, and the sign that was with it talked about his mother. They were his mother's spurs, and she was at home. His dad had gone to Craig to buy a horse, and somehow he got word to her, and Paul puts there, I don't know how because we did not have a telephone, that you need to come get this horse. Get on the train, come get it. So she boards the train in Yampa at 4 in the evening, rides to Craig, she boards the train at 10, gets into Craig at 4 a.m., and climbs on this horse and starts to ride it from Craig clear down south of Yampa. She gets out here in the Hayden Dunkley area somewhere and got lost. She took a wrong turn. And so luckily she ran across some sheep herders that she stopped because she needed a match, because she smoked, she was out of matches. And they fed her, they gave her a drink, they gave her some matches, told her how to get home, and she got home at 11 o'clock that night. Isn't that something? Yeah.
And on that note, Hazy Werner talks about her mother being over in Eagle taking care of some aging parents on her husband's side. She gets word that her little boy has been admitted to the hospital, sugar diabetes, that's what they called it, ran in their family. So she needs to get home to her dying son. She meets up with Ferry Carpenter, and it was snowing so bad the stage wasn't running. So Ferry went to a local ranch. She climbed on, they gave her overalls. She stuffed her big voluminous skirts into these overalls. Her and Ferry Carpenter got on 2 horses and headed towards home from Yampa in the middle of the night. Through Wolcott, through State Bridge. There were times they had to get off and lead their horses. One would break trail and the other one would follow. And she got home in time 4 hours before her son died so she could say goodbye. And Ferry Carpenter said, in all his days of seeing how someone could take abuse and stand the cold and everything, that mother could do it best. He was just amazed to think that a woman could do that and not being dressed for it either. The man up there at Eagle gave her a pair of old overalls. She tucked them down. Now we even freeze in ski clothes. Yeah. So you did what you had to do. That is a team. They were pulling logs, and anytime you took a picture, you always climbed up on the horse. That's Aunt Jenny. And they stopped for a little picture. The horse was everything. There's a root cellar behind. It was a family affair. You started, when did you learn to ride, Marsha?
I had my first horse when I was 6, but I think I was born before that.
Really, I think I started 8 or 9. I was a late comer. There you go. I think that's such an interesting picture. I don't know why. It's very, there's something about it that just draws you into
You also
it.
raced your mare. Mother
Exactly.
raced her, yeah. She used to race Fleet against Marshall Peavy, and she'd take the colt to the end of the race. And he objected.
That was kind of cheating, wasn't it?
So Peter mentioned childbearing, and Hazy Werner, she had a little sister, Benita Bristol Hall. She said, I just happened to be caught at home with no one else around, when no one else was home, and my mom's going to have a baby. I brought my little sister Benita into the world. Just mother and I there. She told me what to do, and I did it. I was 9 years old. You just kind of take it in stride. These are her own words. You just kind of take it in stride. Nothing you can do. Mother told me what to do when Benita was born, and I just did it step by step, and I took care of her and the baby. I put the baby by the stove, built a fire, took care of mother, and kept her in bed a couple of weeks. That doctor never did get there. And later on, she had the opportunity to deliver another baby. She's at a friend's house. She goes, step back, I know what to do. And she delivered another baby. So, let's see. I have one last story with our skiing community. Marcellus Merrill, he set a record over there on the jump, and he was a farming family that came here. In the 3-wire winner, it says Mrs. Merrill. I don't even know her name. Back then, you were Mrs. somebody. Mrs. Merrill tells a story of 1910, when you had the great big skirts, women skied in the great big skirts with the big pole. Back then, material goods were very valued, and they were hard to come by. So all those petticoats and underwear, you would take the flour and the sugar sacks from the Denver mills, and you would piece together all your underwear and stuff that didn't show. Well, all these places in Denver had little cute slogans for their sacks too. Well, they went out on an excursion, and she was skiing so fast, she tumbled straight over enough that all her skirts flew up over her head, and she proudly displayed Pride of the Rockies. And can you think of anything else?
No, we've run
Yeah, we've run it way over.
time.